The night had been still when the SEALs began their approach. The air was thin and sharp in the high mountains of eastern Afghanistan, every breath laced with dust and cold. The men moved silently, boots crunching softly against gravel paths worn into the slopes by centuries of shepherds. Overhead, a crescent moon struggled through a haze of drifting clouds, dimly lighting the jagged ridgelines that cut the horizon. For days, they had prepared for this operation briefings, maps spread across tables, satellite images glowing on screens, intelligence officers pointing to fortified compounds carved into stone. The mission was clear: infiltrate, dismantle, and neutralize an insurgent stronghold believed to be directing attacks across the region. According to intelligence reports, the enemy numbered perhaps a few dozen fighters. Dangerous, yes, but nothing beyond the capacity of the largest SEAL detachment deployed in years. There were 383 of them battle-hardened warriors, trained for chaos and the impossible. Their confidence was not arrogance, but experience. They had faced firefights before, pulled brothers from burning wrecks, cleared villages laced with explosives. This was their work, their purpose, their oath. And yet, something about the silence gnawed at them as they crept closer. The mountains felt too still. Lieutenant Commander Harris, leading the unit, raised a fist and a line of SEALs froze. Shadows pressed against the canyon walls, the only sound the distant trickle of water running through unseen crevices. Harris narrowed his eyes, listening. Even after years in combat, his instincts had not dulled. In fact, they had sharpened. And right now, those instincts screamed danger. "Something's off," he whispered into his comb. The reply crackled back softly. "Copy that, sir." But no movement on thermal. Looks clear, but Harris didn't buy it. They resumed movement, weapons up, every man alert. The stronghold lay ahead, a cluster of stone huts carved into the slope, with larger caves rumored to run deep inside. Intelligence suggested a weapons cache, maybe even a command center for cross-border raids. Taking it out would deal a crippling blow. But when the first shot cracked through the air, it didn't come from the compound. It came from above. A sniper's round slammed into the ground near the lead squad, throwing up sparks and dirt. Instantly, the mountains came alive. From hidden crevices and dug-in nests, muzzle flashes lit the darkness. Mortar screamed overhead and exploded among the rocks, showering men with stone and fire. The sky itself seemed to shatter. Contact! Contact! Voices roared across the combs. The SEALs scattered, finding what cover they could among jagged boulders. Return fire thundered back, rifles snapping, machine guns roaring as they unleashed disciplined bursts toward the ridges. But the enemy was everywhere. The intelligence had been wrong, catastrophically wrong. This wasn't a group of a few dozen fighters. Hundreds of insurgents had lain in wait, their positions dug deep into the mountain walls, their weapons pre-sighted on the approaches. The SEALs had walked into a trap. Explosions rippled across the slope, and men were thrown to the ground, some rising with blood streaming down their faces, others not moving at all. Medics rushed forward, dragging the wounded behind cover, their shouts mixing with the deafening roar of gunfire. "Where's the extraction point?" Someone barked into the radio. Static answered. The comms had been jammed. The realization hit Harris like ice water down his spine. They were cut off. No way to call for backup, no way to signal air support. The enemy had planned every step, every angle. This wasn't an ambush. It was a slaughterhouse waiting to happen. "Form perimeter." Harris shouted. "Hold your ground. We don't break, we fight." The SEALs obeyed without hesitation, falling back into defensive positions as best they could, rifles and grenades answering the storm. They were outnumbered, but not outmatched. Years of training surged through their veins, instincts kicking in. Small squads moved in unison, laying down suppressive fire, flanking where possible, counterattacking with calculated ferocity. But the pressure mounted. Every ridgeline spat fire. Mortar rounds thudded into the ground, one after another, shaking the very earth beneath their boots. Dust clouds swallowed the battlefield, choking lungs and blinding eyes. Ammo's running low. A voice cried, "Medical kit's empty," shouted another. It had only been an hour, but already the toll was devastating. Men who had stormed compounds in Fallujah and patrolled the deadliest valleys of Helmand now found themselves pushed into a shrinking pocket of rock and rubble. A young SEAL named Ortiz crouched behind a boulder, clutching his rifle, sweat pouring down his dirt-streaked face. He had seen combat before, but never like this. Around him, brothers fought and fell, and still the enemy pressed closer. He thought of home, his little sister's laugh, the way his mother always hugged him too tightly when he left. He clenched his jaw. He would not die here. Keep firing. His squad leader roared, hurling a grenade uphill. The explosion briefly silenced a machine gun nest, giving them seconds of reprieve. Seconds. That was all they had. Hours bled into each other. The sun began to rise, casting a pale glow over the battlefield. What the SEALs saw in the light made their stomachs tighten. They were surrounded. The enemy occupied every high point, every ridge, every pathway out. The compound they were meant to assault now loomed behind enemy lines, a mocking reminder of how wrong the intel had been. Escape routes had been cut. The narrow canyon they had used for approach was sealed with collapsed rock from deliberate detonations. Trapped, word burned through Harris's mind as he crawled to cover beside his second-in-command. His uniform was shredded, dust caked in the lines of his face, blood streaked across his arm. "They knew we were coming," Harris muttered grimly. His deputy nodded. They wanted this. Silence hung between them for a moment, broken only by gunfire and screams echoing through the canyon. For the first time in his career, Harris felt the weight of defeat pressing against his chest. The mission wasn't just compromised, it was over. Now it was about survival. "Dig in," he ordered, voice iron despite the dread curling in his gut. "We hold this ground until we figure out a way out. Nobody quits. Nobody breaks." The men obeyed, dragging rocks and debris into makeshift barricades, tending to the wounded with whatever scraps of supplies they had left. Every face was lined with exhaustion, yet their eyes burned with defiance. They were SEALs. Even trapped, even outnumbered, surrender was not in their vocabulary. But as the enemy regrouped for another wave, and the mountains shook with fresh bombardments, Harris couldn't shake the feeling that they were staring into the mouth of hell itself. And unless a miracle came from the sky, 383 of America's finest warriors would never leave this mountain alive. The first hours of the firefight had drained the SEALs of energy, but it was the creeping realization of what lay ahead that hollowed out their spirits. Morning bled into midday, and the Afghan sun rose high, blazing down on the canyon floor like a cruel overseer. Heat shimmered across jagged rocks, mixing with the smoke of burning munitions and the acrid stench of gunpowder. Every man's throat was dry, their canteens nearly empty, sweat stinging their eyes. The enemy did not relent. Wave after wave of insurgents pressed forward, firing from elevated ridges, slipping into natural trenches, and hurling mortar that pounded the SEALs' defensive circle. The mountains themselves seemed to betray the Americans, funneling sound and fire into their position until every explosion rattled their bones. "Keep your heads down," Harris bellowed, pulling a wounded man behind cover. Blood soaked through the young soldier's uniform, staining the dust beneath him. A medic slid to his side, working frantically with gauze and morphine, his hands trembling but precise. Around them, the fight raged on, bullets snapping through the air like angry hornets. By noon, the SEALs' situation had worsened. Ammunition crates, hauled in at the mission's start, now lay nearly empty. Men rationed their rounds, firing in controlled bursts, making every bullet count. Some were already scavenging from fallen brothers, whispering brief apologies as they stripped spare magazines. The enemy, by contrast, seemed endless. Harris knew why. They had supply lines threaded through these mountains. Every time one wave fell, another climbed from hidden tunnels or crossed ridges with renewed energy. The insurgents were at home here, fighting on their terms, their ground. The SEALs were intruders trapped in a cage. In the chaos, a young operator named Michaels pressed against the stone, breathing hard, eyes darting. His hands shook as he tried to reload. His squad leader clamped a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "Breathe," he ordered, calm but firm. "Breathe and focus. You're still in the fight." Michaels nodded, forcing himself to calm, though fear gnawed at him. These men had trained for hell, but training didn't erase the human heart's terror when staring at overwhelming odds. Still, he gritted his teeth, jammed the magazine in place, and popped up to fire. The fight wasn't over, not yet. The SEALs attempted counterattacks when opportunities appeared, but each movement came at a cost. One squad tried to push toward a rocky outcrop to gain high ground, only to be cut down by withering machine gun fire. 2 men didn't return. Their brothers dragged their bodies back under a hail of bullets, jaws clenched in grim silence. By mid-afternoon, the medic supplies were nearly gone. Bandages were torn into strips. Morphine injectors were empty. Men with shattered legs clenched their teeth on leather straps, while others worked tourniquets tight enough to stop the bleeding. Still, they fought. The SEALs were elite, but they were also flesh and blood, and flesh could only endure so much. Harris crouched behind a boulder, sweat streaking his dusty face. He wiped blood someone else's from his sleeve and pressed his radio again. Static hissed back, cruel and unchanging. The enemy jamming was effective. They were alone. "Sir, they're closing in," his deputy warned, crawling beside him. "We can't hold like this forever." Harris's eyes scanned the ridges. Dozens of insurgents moved like shadows, firing from cover, shifting positions with ruthless coordination. He had fought in Iraq, in Somalia, in countless dark corners of the world, but he had never seen an enemy this prepared, this determined. It was as though the entire mountain had been waiting for them. "We'll hold," Harris growled. "We don't have a choice," but inside, he felt the weight pressing heavier. His men were fighting like lions, but lions eventually tired, and the enemy was a tide that never stopped coming. Toward evening, a new tactic emerged. Snipers picked off men one by one, their rounds echoing sharp cracks across the canyon. Every time a SEAL raised his head, he risked it being the last thing he ever did. Men dragged their fallen brothers back into cover, rage flashing in their eyes. But the fight had ground into a war of attrition, and attrition favored the side with more bodies to throw. The SEALs fought back with ingenuity. Spotters scanned the ridges through scopes, calling out sniper nests. Marksmen answered with precise shots, silencing some of the enemy's sharpshooters. But for every nest destroyed, another opened fire. It was a deadly game of whack-a-mole, and it was costing them dearly. The psychological strain grew unbearable. Sleep was impossible, even in moments of quiet. Every rock seemed to hide a rifle barrel, every shadow a creeping enemy fighter. Some men closed their eyes for seconds at a time, only to jerk awake at the next explosion. Exhaustion became another enemy, gnawing at their focus, slowing their reflexes. Hunger followed. Their rations had been planned for a swift strike and return, not a prolonged siege. By the second day, men were rationing crumbs of protein bars, sharing what little they had. Thirst was worse, canteens ran dry, lips cracked and bleeding. The sun by day and the cold by night tormented them without mercy. Yet despite all this, the SEALs refused to break. They fought with the grim determination of men who understood what was at stake, not just their lives, but the brotherhood that bound them, the mission that defined them, and the unyielding oath they had sworn. On the third night, Harris gathered his senior men in a narrow alcove, lit only by the glow of muzzle flashes in the distance. Their faces were hollow, eyes bloodshot, uniforms ripped and stained. "We're not getting out this way," Harris admitted, his voice low but steady. "The canyon's sealed. The ridges are theirs. We're trapped." Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. They all knew it. They had known it for hours, perhaps longer. But hearing it said aloud cut deeper than any bullet. "So what now?" one of them asked. Harris's jaw clenched. He stared into the darkness, listening to the echoes of battle. He thought of the families waiting back home, the weight of command pressing on his shoulders. His men needed hope, even if it was a threadbare lie. "We hold," he said finally. "We hold until we find a way, or until someone hears us." But deep in his gut, Harris feared no one would. As dawn broke on the fourth day, the SEALs were battered, bloodied, and exhausted. Their numbers had thinned. Ammunition was down to single magazines for many. The ground around them was littered with shell casings, shattered rock, and the bodies of enemies and brothers alike. And still the enemy came. The SEALs looked to the sky with dry, burning eyes, praying for a miracle, for the thunder of rotors, the scream of jets, anything. But the sky remained empty, save for circling birds that drifted lazily above the carnage below. Desperation had settled in, thick and suffocating. Every man knew they were teetering on the edge of annihilation. And yet, not one of them laid down his weapon. Because if they were to die here, they would die fighting. The fourth night dragged into the fifth morning, and the trapped SEALs were ghosts of the warriors who had first set foot on the mountainside. Their uniforms were shredded, caked in blood and dust. Their eyes burned red from sleepless nights, and their lips cracked from thirst. The constant barrage of enemy fire had dulled into a rhythm of misery mortar thudding, rifles snapping, the occasional sharp whistle of a sniper's bullet ricocheting off stone. They had held the ground longer than anyone thought possible. But endurance has limits, even for the strongest. By dawn, their ammunition was nearly gone. Harris walked the makeshift perimeter, checking on his men. Most crouched in silence, faces drawn, weapons clutched tight, though their magazines were down to the last few rounds. A medic sat with his back against a rock, hands trembling as he tried to bandage a wound with nothing but a torn sleeve. Another operator sat beside a fallen brother, staring blankly at the rising sun, as though daring it to bring another day of suffering. Harris knelt beside them, placing a steady hand on the man's shoulder. "Stay sharp," he said softly. "We're still in the fight." But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. They couldn't last much longer. He pulled his battered radio from his vest. For days, it had been useless, hijacked by enemy jammers. Every attempt to call command had been met with nothing but hissing static. Still, Harris pressed the transmit button and spoke, voice hoarse from shouting orders and dust. "This is Commander Harris of Task Unit Bravo," he rasped. "We are pinned, coordinates, static." He tried again, desperation rising. 383 operators trapped, surrounded, immediate support required. Any station, respond, more static. He slammed the radio against the rock, frustration flashing in his eyes. Around him, men glanced over, their silence heavy with unspoken truth. They were on their own. But then, faintly, Through the haze of white noise came a crackle. Harris froze, lifting the radio to his ear. ... Copy ... Say again. Location? The words were broken, barely audible, but they were words. Not static, not silence. Harris's heart pounded. This is Commander Harris. He barked, adrenaline flooding his veins. 383 SEALs pinned in Kunar Province Grid 227. Surrounded, heavy contact, running out of time. Requesting immediate close air support. Do you copy? The pause that followed stretched an eternity. Harris thought the connection had died, but then a voice returned clearer this time, steadier. Copy that, Task Unit Bravo. Stand by. For the first time in days, a flicker of hope pierced the fog of despair. Around the perimeter, word spread quickly. They made contact. Command heard us. Air's on the way. Men who had been slumped against rocks straightened. Shoulders lifted. Faces that had been hollow with exhaustion now carried sparks of life. It was fragile, but it was something. Still, Harris knew better than to celebrate. Air support was not guaranteed. The enemy controlled the ridges with anti-aircraft guns. Any pilot who flew into this kill zone was signing a death warrant. He had seen A-10s and Black Hawks swatted from the sky before, but they had no other choice. Hours dragged by as the battle raged on. The enemy pressed harder, sensing the SEALs' weakening state. Harris's men fought with everything they had left, bayonets fixed, knives drawn, fists clenched. Ammunition dwindled to single rounds, then none. They stripped weapons from fallen insurgents, turning enemy rifles against their owners. Every bullet fired bought another second of survival. Through it all, Harris clung to the radio, knuckles white as he gripped it like a lifeline. Finally, near dusk, it came alive again. Task Unit Bravo. This is Reaper Command. Air support inbound. ETA 15 mics. Hold position. Relief washed through Harris, but it was tempered with the harsh reality. 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours under this kind of fire. Copy that, he replied. We'll hold. He looked around at his men. Bloodied, battered, exhausted beyond words. And yet, when he met their eyes, he saw fire. They weren't done. Not yet. All right, listen up, Harris shouted, voice carrying over the din of battle. Air's coming. We just have to hold until then. 15 minutes. That's it. 15 minutes, and we get out of this hell. So dig deep, lock it down, and fight like hell until the sky brings us salvation. A cheer rose, ragged but fierce. The SEALs tightened their lines, reloaded their scavenged rifles, and prepared for one last stand. The enemy, sensing desperation, surged forward in waves, trying to crush the Americans before help arrived. The canyon erupted with fire explosions tearing the ground, bullets slicing the air, men screaming in rage and defiance. Hold the line, Harris roared, firing until his rifle clicked empty, then drawing his pistol and firing again. Every second felt like an eternity. 10 minutes. 8, 5. By now, the SEALs were fighting hand-to-hand in some places, blades flashing, fists slamming into faces. The ground was a chaos of dust, blood, and fury. Then, faint at first but unmistakable, came a sound that froze every man mid-breath. A low, guttural roar, like thunder rolling through the mountains. Engines. Not just any engines, the unmistakable growl of a warthog. The SEALs looked up, and through the smoke and dust, they saw it. A dark silhouette slicing across the twilight sky. Wings broad, nose heavy, its engines growling like an angry beast. The A-10 Thunderbolt to the Warthog. Relief crashed through the SEALs like a tidal wave. Some shouted, some laughed, some simply wept, tears carving tracks down their grime-streaked faces. The enemy, too, heard the sound, and panic rippled through their lines. They knew what the Warthog meant. Its cannon could shred armored columns, tear bunkers apart, and now it was circling above them like a predator that had found its prey. Harris gripped the radio, voice fierce. "Air support, this is Task Unit Bravo. We see you. We're marked with infrared strobes. Do not let these bastards close in." The reply came back, crisp, calm, almost unnervingly steady. "Copy that. Task Unit Bravo. We've got you in sight. You're not dying on this mountain today." The voice belonged to Captain Sarah Mitchell, though. Harris and his men didn't know her name yet. They only knew salvation had arrived. And in that moment, hope, long buried beneath days of fire and blood, roared back to life. The SEALs tightened their grips on their weapons, ready to fight again. They didn't know how long this battle would last, but they knew one thing for certain. The sky was no longer silent. The miracle they had prayed for had come, and the enemy was about to learn what it meant to be hunted by the Warthog. The roar grew louder, filling the canyon like the growl of a beast roused from slumber. Dust stirred across the battlefield as the SEALs craned their necks skyward, squinting through smoke and haze. The silhouette appeared against the fading light-broad wings, straight and strong, engines mounted high like twin fists pounding the sky. To the enemy, it was death itself. To the SEALs, it was hope forged in steel. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog. Captain Sarah Mitchell sat in the cockpit, her hands steady on the controls. The aircraft shuddered under turbulence as she descended low over the mountains, scanning the ridges with practiced eyes. The battlefield below was chaos, muzzle flashes everywhere, dust clouds rising from mortar blasts, infrared strobes flickering where the SEALs had marked their desperate perimeter. Her heart pounded, but not from fear, from focus. This was her element, the place where skill and courage fused into instinct. She had flown dozens of sorties, but this mission carried a weight she could feel in her bones. Nearly 400 men were cornered down there, depending on her alone to break the stranglehold. She toggled her comms. "Task Unit Bravo, this is Hog 1-1. Eyes on. Say target priority." On the ground, Harris clutched his radio like it was life itself. His voice was raw, cracked, but fierce. "Hog 1-1, we are surrounded. Enemy heavy machine guns on the northern ridge, mortar in the east caves. Snipers all along the west wall. We need immediate suppression, or we're done." "Copy," Mitchell replied, calm and precise. "Stand by for fireworks." She banked the A-10 hard, her harness biting into her shoulders. Below, insurgents scattered as they realized what had entered the fight. Some fired skyward, tracer rounds arcing helplessly toward the diving Warthog. Others ducked into caves, knowing what was about to come. Mitchell's thumb pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared. The sound was unlike anything else in war, a guttural, earth-shaking growl, as 30mm rounds spewed forth at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. The canyon lit up as shells slammed into the northern ridge, shredding rock, sandbags, and the insurgents manning the machine guns. The ground erupted in sprays of dirt and fire. On the perimeter, SEALs cheered, their weary faces lit by muzzle flashes and sudden hope. "That's it. Light 'em up," one shouted, pumping his fist as the ridge above collapsed under the storm of cannon fire. Mitchell pulled up sharply, rounds still thundering, then leveled off and prepared for another pass. Her HUD blinked with warnings. Anti-aircraft tracers cut the air dangerously close, but the A-10 was built for this. Heavily armored, slow but unbreakable, it was designed to fly through hell and back. She keyed her mic again. North Ridge suppressed. Lining up east caves. Harris wasted no time. Copy, Hog 1-1. That's where the mortar are chewing us alive. Drop it all. Mitchell nodded, eyes narrowing as she swung the warthog into a wide arc. She aligned her targeting systems on the cluster of cave mouths dug into the eastern slope. Mortar crews scrambled inside, dragging tubes and crates, but it was too late. She squeezed the trigger again. The Avenger spat fire, and 30mm shells tore into the caves. Rock disintegrated, fire belched outward, and mortar tubes split apart like kindling. Secondary explosions rocked the mountainside as stockpiles of ammunition detonated, the fireball lighting up the dusk sky. Mortar neutralized, Mitchell reported, her voice steady though her pulse hammered. On the ground, the SEALs whooped and hollered, their energy renewed. For the first time in days, they weren't only surviving, they were winning. But the fight was far from over. Enemy snipers along the western ridges kept firing, pinning squads whenever they tried to maneuver. Mitchell spotted the glint of scopes and adjusted her line. She dropped altitude, flying so low she could see the panicked expressions of fighters diving for cover. With surgical precision, she stitched the ridge with cannon fire, silencing sniper after sniper. Dust and rock avalanched down the slope. Inside her cockpit, alarms blared a missile lock warning. Mitchell's eyes snapped to the radar. An enemy team had dragged up a shoulder-fired SAM, its launch tube already glowing. Missile! Missile! She shouted, yanking the stick. The warthog banked hard left, flares popping from its belly. A fiery streak tore past, exploding harmlessly in the distance. The A-10 rattled under the stress, but it held, its titanium armor shrugging off shrapnel. Mitchell gritted her teeth, fury flashing. You want me down? Not today. She looped around, spotted the SAM team scrambling to reload, and obliterated them with a burst that reduced their position to rubble. On the ground, Harris watched through binoculars, all mixing with relief. Whoever this pilot was, she wasn't just skilled, she was relentless. God bless you, Og 1-1, he muttered. The SEALs seized the opening. Squads surged forward, reclaiming ground, dragging the wounded with them. Every step they took, Mitchell covered from above, her cannon carving corridors of safety through enemy fire. For the insurgents, the tide had turned. What had been a certain victory now crumbled under the wrath of the warthog. Their machine guns were silent, their mortar gone, their snipers crushed. Fear spread among their ranks as the aircraft circled like a hawk, striking again and again with merciless accuracy. Still, the enemy fought, hurling themselves against the SEALs with fanatic desperation. They knew if they didn't finish the Americans before the warthog completed its mission, their advantage would vanish. Gunfire and explosions echoed across the canyon in a frenzy of chaos. Mitchell's voice cut through the radio. Task Unit Bravo, corridor opening west. Push through. I'll cover you. Harris didn't hesitate. You heard her. Move. Get those wounded out first, go. The SEALs moved as one, discipline intact even after days of hell. They carried stretchers, covered one another, fired in bursts as they advanced toward the path Mitchell had carved. Above them, the A-10 flew low, its shadow sweeping over the men like a guardian angel. Every pass shook the earth. Every burst of cannon fire lit the sky. And every SEAL who looked up saw salvation in the shape of that ugly, beautiful aircraft and the woman inside who refused to let them die. As night fell, the canyon was transformed. What had been a killing ground became a battlefield of shattered ridges and silenced guns. Fires burned in the caves, smoke curled into the sky, and the insurgent army lay broken. The SEALs were battered, bloodied, but alive. And above them, circling patiently, the warthog remained, its engines growling in defiance, ready to strike again at the first sign of danger. Captain Sarah Mitchell's hands finally eased on the controls. Sweat dripped down her temples, her throat dry from hours of focus, but her resolve never wavered. She looked down at the blinking strobes marking the seals below and felt the weight of her responsibility. They weren't out yet, but they had a chance. And as long as she was in the sky, she would make damn sure that chance became reality. The battle was far from finished, but the tide had turned. The warthog had arrived, and everything had changed. The night air was thick with smoke and chaos, the canyon echoing with the thunder of gunfire, shouts, and explosions. Yet above it all, the most dominant sound was the guttural growl of the GA-U-8 Avenger cannon and the roar of twin turbofan engines. The SEALs had seen air support before, but nothing like this. Each pass of the warthog was a spectacle thunder rolling from the skies, devastation pouring down with terrifying precision. But with every strike, the enemy adapted. The insurgents, desperate and determined, unleashed everything they had against the beast in the sky. Anti-aircraft tracers lit up like fireworks, streaking across the darkness, cutting arcs of red and green. They fired RPGs blindly into the air, detonating in bursts of fire. Machine gun nests, hastily remanned after each barrage, spat streams of hot metal into the heavens. And Mitchell flew right into it. Her cockpit was alive with alarms, radar locks, altitude warnings, missile alerts. The HUD flashed red across her visor. The warthog's frame rattled and groaned under the stress, but Sarah's hands were steady, her breathing controlled. She had trained for this moment all her life, but training could never replicate the razor's edge of reality. Task Unit Bravo, Hog 1-1. I'm going in again. Mark targets with strobes if you can. On the ground, Harris lifted his radio while crouching behind shattered stone. Copy, Hog 1-1. You've got snipers on the south ridge cutting us down every time we move. Priority 1. Roger, eyes on. She banked sharply, dropping low over the canyon floor. The ground seemed to rise to meet her as the A-10 screamed downward. Flak burst around her, rocking the cockpit with each concussive thud. An RPG streaked past her left wing, missing by mere meters. Sarah didn't flinch. She aligned her sights on the ridge, thumb tightening on the trigger. Brett! The Avenger cannon roared, its voice so loud that even the SEALs on the ground felt the vibration in their chests. The ridge erupted in sprays of rock and blood, enemy snipers erased in a torrent of fire. Snipers neutralized, she reported coolly, though her heart pounded like a drum. She yanked the stick upward, skimming the ridge so close that loose dirt and debris blasted outward in her wake. Below, the SEALs cheered again, but the celebration was cut short as enemy mortar resumed from a hidden position deeper in the canyon. Shells whistled overhead and exploded dangerously close to their line. Mortar. New source, north slope? Harris barked. I see it, Mitchell replied. She dove again, this time weaving through a wall of anti-aircraft fire, so dense it looked like a net of fireflies. Her aircraft shook violently as rounds pinged against its armored belly. A warning light blinked hydraulics hit, but still operational. She gritted her teeth, pressing harder. The mortar crew scrambled, trying to drag their tubes into cover, but they never stood a chance. Mitchell stitched the slope with cannon fire, turning their position into a storm of flame and shattered earth. Secondary detonations followed as their ammo ignited, blasting fireballs high into the air. The SEALs roared approval, their morale fueled by the relentless support. But Harris knew this was no endless miracle. Each pass pushed the pilot closer to danger. Each dive put her in the crosshairs of dozens of desperate fighters. And then it happened. As Mitchell pulled up from another run, a surface-to-air missile streaked from the canyon floor. She jerked the stick, flares bursting from her wings, but the missile was too fast. It clipped her right wingtip, sending the A-10 into a violent spin. Hit. Hog 1-1 is hit. Sarah shouted into the comms, her voice taut with strain. Warning lights screamed across her panel. The aircraft shook uncontrollably, altitude dropping fast. On the ground, Harris froze. If she went down, they were finished. Hog 1-1, come back. Stay with us. Sarah fought the controls, muscles straining as she countered the spin. The A-10 groaned like a wounded animal, but began to steady. Smoke trailed from the wingtip, but the engines held, the beast refusing to die. I'm still flying, she gritted out. Damage contained. Coming around again. The SEALs who heard her couldn't believe it. The Warthog, even after taking a direct hit, was still in the fight. And Sarah, she was as relentless as her machine. But Mitchell knew the margin for error had shrunk to nothing. The enemy had locked onto her, and the next missile could be fatal. She'd have to fly lower, faster, riskier, to keep them from drawing a clean bead. Task Unit Bravo. I'm going low. Real low. Keep your heads down. Without hesitation, she dropped altitude until she was skimming just above the canyon floor. Dust and debris swirled in her wake as she weaved through the tight terrain, so close to the ridges that her wings nearly clipped the rock. Every maneuver demanded perfection. One wrong move, and the A-10 would slam into the mountainside. Enemy fighters fired wildly, but her speed and low altitude made her nearly impossible to track. She was a blur of steel and fire, dancing with death in a canyon alive with gunfire. Then she saw a convoy of technicals, pushing reinforcements toward the SEALs' perimeter. Trucks with mounted heavy machine guns, headlights bouncing as they tore across the rocky ground. If they reached the fight, the SEALs would be overrun. Sarah's jaw tightened. Not on my watch. She lined up her sights, unleashing a stream of 30mm shells that shredded the lead truck in an instant. It erupted into flames, blocking the others behind it. She strafed the line, ripping through engines, tearing men from their gun mounts. The convoy disintegrated under her wrath, reduced to burning wreckage in seconds. Convoy destroyed, she announced. Harris exhaled hard, gripping his radio. You're a damn angel. Hog 1-1. We owe you everything. But Sarah didn't let herself feel the praise. She had no room for pride, no space for fear. Only focus. She was locked in the most dangerous dance of her life, threading her machine through fire, dodging missiles, carving salvation for the men below. As the minutes stretched into hours, the battlefield transformed. What had been a death trap became an escape corridor. With each pass, Sarah carved another scar into the canyon, eliminating nests, tearing apart choke points, dismantling the enemy piece by piece. On the ground, the SEALs pressed forward, their strength renewed with every strike from above. They dragged their wounded, fired with ferocity, and pushed toward the western gap Sarah had begun to clear. But the enemy wasn't giving up. Desperation fueled their fight. A wave of insurgents surged from hidden tunnels, screaming as they charged the SEALs' rear. Harris shouted into the radio, Hog 1-1, they're on us. Rear assault. Hold tight, Sarah said, banking hard. She dropped so low she skimmed treetops, the canyon walls rushing past in a blur. Her cannon roared one final time, tearing through the charging wave in a blaze of fire and steel. Bodies scattered, the assault broken in seconds. The SEALs surged forward, clear for the moment. The path to freedom was open, but holding it would mean more risk, more fire, more danger for the woman above. Inside the cockpit, Sarah's hands trembled for the first time. The fatigue was catching up, the damage to her aircraft worsening. But she steadied herself, jaw set. She couldn't stop now. Not while 383 men still depended on her. The dance wasn't over. It had only just begun. The canyon smelled of smoke, burning fuel, and blood. Darkness pressed heavy, broken only by the orange flicker of fires and the brilliant white flashes of tracer rounds slicing through the night. The SEALs crouched low, weapons tight, ears ringing, eyes darting. For hours they had clung to survival by a thread. Now, for the first time, there was movement. A way forward. A chance to live. Above them, Captain Sarah Mitchell's A-10 circled like a hawk, wings scarred, one engine belching smoke, its belly streaked with soot and fire burns. The Warthog looked battered, but it was alive. More importantly, it was deadly. Every time her cannon barked, the enemy broke. Every time she made a pass, the SEALs gained ground. Task Unit Bravo, Mitchell's calm voice cracked through the comms. Corridor West is almost open. You move when I say copy? Harris pressed his radio to his mouth, crouched behind a crumbling boulder. Copy, Hog 1-1. We're ready, but we've still got enemy nests pinning us. If we push now, we'll get chewed alive. Not for long, she replied. Sarah lined up her sights, banking the A-10 low until the canyon walls blurred. Her eyes locked on a heavy machine gun nest dug into a stone outcrop that overlooked the SEALs' only viable escape path. She knew that if the men tried to move without silencing it, they would be slaughtered in seconds. She exhaled slowly. Then she pressed the trigger. Broad! The Avenger cannon thundered, tearing into the nest with surgical precision. The gun emplacement exploded, spraying debris down the slope. SEALs looked up, nodding to one another. One less threat. One step closer to survival. But it wasn't just about opening space. It was about timing. Mitchell coordinated with Harris on every move, like a conductor leading an orchestra of chaos. You'll advance on my next pass. Squad Alpha, move first with wounded. Squad Bravo covers. Then rotate. Keep low. I'll keep the corridor clean. Roger that, Harris replied. We'll follow your lead. The SEALs prepared. Wounded men were slung onto stretchers. Weapons distributed. Ammo checked. Every one of them was exhausted, but there was a new fire in their eyes. They weren't waiting to die anymore. They were preparing to live. Stand by, Mitchell said. She dove again, unleashing a burst that ripped apart a cluster of insurgents hiding behind a ridgeline. Dust and fire filled the air. Go. Go now. Alpha, move. Harris roared. The first squad sprinted through the corridor, boots pounding against stone, dragging stretchers as rounds snapped past their heads. Insurgents scrambled to regroup, firing desperately from the flanks. But Sarah was always there. She strafed the ridge to the left, silencing rifles with a storm of fire. Then she swung right, hitting a barricade of sandbags that crumbled under her fury. Every move the enemy made, she was faster. Every time they thought they could cut the SEALs down, she crushed them. The corridor widened, carved by fire and steel. But Mitchell was pushing herself, and her aircraft, to the absolute limit. A damaged wingtip dragged slightly, making each maneuver harder. Her arms ached from gripping the controls. Sweat ran down her temples, soaking her flight suit. And every warning light on her panel seemed to scream at once. Come on, hold together, she muttered, patting the console. Just a little longer. Down below, Alpha Squad reached the midpoint. They ducked into cover, setting their wounded down, returning fire. Bravo Squad took their turn, sprinting forward as Mitchell blasted apart another pocket of resistance. It was working. For the first time, Harris felt like they might make it. He glanced at the men around him, faces blackened with soot, uniforms torn, eyes hollow yet burning with willpower. They had been cornered, buried under hopeless odds, but the Warthog had given them back their fight. Then the enemy countered. Insurgents, furious and desperate, surged from a tunnel network deeper in the canyon. Dozens of them poured into the escape corridor, AKs blazing, grenades flying. The SEALs opened fire instantly, but the enemy's sheer numbers threatened to overwhelm them. Hog 1-1 were blocked. Harris shouted. "I see them," Mitchell snapped. She banked hard, dropping so low that sparks lit up as her landing gear nearly scraped the rocks. She opened fire, the Avenger cannon screaming. The front wave of insurgents disintegrated in an instant, grenades detonating among their own lines. The survivors scattered, broken and terrified. The SEALs cheered, pushing forward again. But Sarah's panel screamed at her fuel levels dangerously low. She had burned through nearly everything in the hours-long firefight. She radioed Harris. "Task Unit Bravo, I've got maybe one more heavy pass before I need to pull back. You need to move everyone now." Harris's gut tightened. "Everyone moves together, boys. All squads go." The canyon erupted in motion. Dozens of SEALs sprinted, dragging wounded, firing as they ran. Harris stayed near the rear, barking orders, refusing to move until every man was accounted for. Sarah lined up her final pass. She spotted another cluster of insurgents, regrouping near the western exit, setting up a last-ditch barricade. If they weren't cleared, the SEALs would slam right into them. Her thumb pressed the trigger. Broad! The barricade disintegrated under her fire. Trucks flipped, fighters were hurled into the air, the entire slope engulfed in flame. Smoke and dust choked the canyon, masking the SEALs' movements as they poured through. On the ground, Harris grabbed his radio. "Corridor clear. We're moving." Sarah exhaled hard, scanning her fuel gauge critical levels. She couldn't stay much longer. Her voice came calm over the comms, but her chest was tight. "Keep moving west. You've got a window." "I'll cover as long as I can." The SEALs surged forward, like water breaking through a dam. They carried the wounded, covered one another, and sprinted toward the freedom carved out of hell by the A-10 above. The canyon that had been their prison was now a graveyard of burning wreckage, collapsed ridges, and silenced guns. Every mark of destruction bore the signature of the Warthog, and though she was running on fumes, Sarah circled one more time, making sure the last of them got through. Her aircraft rattled, alarms screamed, but she refused to leave until the ground commander's voice came through clear. "Task Unit Bravo, all units clear." For the first time in hours, Sarah let herself lean back in the seat. Her hands trembled, her throat ached, and her vision blurred with exhaustion. She had done it. But there was no triumph in her voice, only steel. "Copy. Hog 1-1 RTB. Good luck out there, boys." Down below, the SEALs paused only for a heartbeat, looking up into the night sky, where the battered silhouette of the Warthog still circled. Some raised their hands in silent salute, gratitude etched into every exhausted line of their faces. Then they turned and kept moving. The path to freedom had been carved not by chance, not by luck, but by fire, willpower, and the unbreakable bond between warriors on the ground and the angel who guarded them from above. The canyon floor shook under the weight of hundreds of boots pounding in unison. The SEALs moved as one body, their discipline holding strong despite exhaustion, wounds, and the chaos that pressed against them from every side. For hours, they had clung to life in a cage of stone and fire. Now, for the first time, the cage had cracks. Now there was a way out. But the breakout would be the most dangerous step yet. "Move, stay tight. Cover left and right." Harris barked, his voice hoarse but commanding. He ran near the rear, scanning constantly, refusing to abandon a single man. Beside him, SEALs dragged stretchers, carried wounded over their shoulders, and fired back at shadows that flickered across the ridges. Above them, Sarah Mitchell's A-10 circled low, her engines rumbling like the growl of a predator stalking prey. Her aircraft was battered, wounded, running on fumes, but it still had teeth. Each pass of her Avenger cannon tore open space, forcing the enemy back just long enough for the SEALs to advance. She pressed her comms. "Task Unit Bravo, you've got 20 minutes before I'm out of fuel." "Make it count." "Copy, Hog 1-1, Harris replied, his eyes never leaving the slopes. "We're moving as fast as we can." The SEALs surged forward, their boots splashing through puddles of blood and oil, kicking up dust that mixed with smoke until it clung to their lungs. The corridor Mitchell had carved was jagged and raw collapsed barricades, burning vehicles, smoking craters, but it was open, and that was enough. The enemy, however, wasn't done. Insurgents poured from the high ground, rallying with wild desperation. From cave mouths, ridges, and shattered fortifications, they opened fire, their bullets sparking against stone and chewing the ground around the SEALs' feet. The canyon became a storm of lead again. Contact left. One SEAL shouted, dropping to a knee and firing bursts into the darkness. His rounds cut down 3 fighters, but a dozen more replaced them. Harris lifted his radio. "Hog 1-1, we need fire on the left ridge now." "On it." Mitchell banked hard, the Warthog's engine screaming as she dove low into the storm. Flak and tracers filled the sky, glowing like angry stars. Her HUD lit up with warnings, but she pushed through, thumb pressing the trigger. Brat! The ridge disintegrated under her fire, fighters flung like ragdolls as the Avenger cannon carved through rock and flesh. Dust cascaded down in sheets, choking off the remaining gunfire. "Clear left," she reported, pulling up sharp, her chest straining against the harness. Her fuel gauge dipped dangerously close to empty, but she shoved the thought aside. They weren't out yet. The SEALs pressed forward, sweat streaking through grime on their faces, their lungs burning from smoke and effort. Every man carried more than his own weight gear, ammo, the wounded. Every man moved because the others depended on him. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was loyalty, brotherhood, but the enemy was relentless. Just as the SEALs reached the western mouth of the canyon, heavy fire erupted from the slopes above, a last-ditch barricade of machine guns and RPG teams, waiting for them like wolves at the exit. The path ahead was a gauntlet of death. Harris cursed under his breath. Damn it. Hog 1-1, they're dug in at the mouth. We can't break through. Sarah scanned the scene, her stomach tightening. The enemy had chosen the perfect choke point. The SEALs would be cut down the second they tried to cross. Unless she cleared it. She pulled her stick back, climbing high above the canyon for the first time in hours. The SEALs below saw her silhouette rise against the stars, battered but unyielding. She was setting up for something bigger. "Task Unit Bravo, keep your men down," she said over comms, her voice low, steady. "I'm going to crack the gate." Harris clenched his teeth. He understood what she was about to do and what it would cost her. "Copy, Hog 1-1. Godspeed." Sarah throttled forward, her engines groaning as she gained altitude. The A-10 rattled, warning lights flashing like angry eyes across her console. Her fuel gauge blinked red less than 10 minutes left. But there was no hesitation in her hands as she rolled the Warthog over and dove. The canyon walls rushed up, jagged teeth of stone that could shred her to pieces with the slightest miscalculation. Tracers stitched the sky around her, RPGs whooshed past her wings, and still she came on, steady, relentless. Her sights locked on the barricade. Her thumb pressed the trigger. The Avenger cannon unleashed a final, unholy roar. Brat! The earth itself seemed to tear apart. Machine gun nests exploded, RPG teams vanished in fire. Vehicles flipped like toys under the storm of 30mm rounds. The mouth of the canyon, once a wall of death, became a graveyard of smoking wreckage. The seals didn't wait for silence. Harris roared, "Now! Move, move, move!" They surged forward, sprinting through the destruction, boots crunching over twisted metal and shattered rock. The air was hot with smoke and ash, but the corridor was open. Freedom was within reach. Behind them, the canyon collapsed into chaos, enemy fighters retreating, fires spreading, echoes of cannon fire still ringing in their ears. Above, Mitchell pulled the A-10 skyward again, her engine sputtering, her fuel nearly gone. She glanced down at the seals pouring through the mouth of the canyon, every one of them alive because of her. Relief surged through her chest, but it was tempered by exhaustion, so deep it felt like gravity itself was trying to drag her down. She keyed her mic one last time. "Task Unit Bravo, you're clear. Get your men out. I'll hold the rear as long as I can." On the ground, Harris slowed for just a second, lifting his gaze to the dark silhouette of the warthog circling above. He raised his hand in salute, words catching in his throat. "We'll never forget this, Hog 11. Never." The seals disappeared into the night, their shadows swallowed by freedom. And Sarah Mitchell, her A-10 bleeding smoke across the sky, banked once more over the canyon, guardian, warrior, savior dancing with fire until the very last drop of fuel. The night air was quiet now, but it was not peace. It was the calm after a storm of unimaginable ferocity. The canyon that had been alive with gunfire, smoke, and the roar of engines was now filled with echoes of explosions, screams, and the relentless Avenger cannon that had turned death into survival. The seals moved cautiously, their eyes scanning every ridge and outcrop, hearts still pounding from the adrenaline of escape. Corpses of insurgents lay scattered across the canyon floor, twisted vehicles smoldering, and makeshift barricades reduced to ash and rubble. For the men of Task Unit Bravo, it was a surreal sight, destruction on a scale so vast that it seemed almost unreal. Yet amidst the carnage, the living moved forward, carrying their wounded, dragging the bloodied and broken toward the extraction point. Harris ran through the narrow corridor, his boots crunching over debris, mud, and scattered spent casings. He paused for a moment to take stock. Every man still alive was a miracle. Nearly 400 soldiers had faced near annihilation, and now, thanks to one pilot and the discipline of brothers in arms, they were still breathing. "Alpha Squad, regroup!" he shouted. His voice was raspy, hoarse from shouting for days without pause. "Bravo, report status." One by one, men responded. Some carried stretchers with wounded comrades, others leaned on each other, every step an act of sheer willpower. The exhaustion in their faces was profound, but beneath it burned a quiet, fierce pride, the pride of survival, of defiance, of unity against impossible odds. Then, like a beacon against the night sky, they saw her Captain Sarah Mitchell's warthog. Its engines groaned in low, steady relief, smoke trailing from the damaged wingtip. She had circled the canyon one last time, ensuring the SEALs made it through before heading toward the extraction coordinates herself. Even wounded, the aircraft still radiated lethal precision, a symbol of salvation that had saved hundreds of lives. Harris pressed his radio. "Hog 11, this is Bravo Command. All units clear. Repeat, all units clear. You saved every man." "Copy, Task Unit Bravo," Mitchell's voice replied, calm yet edged with exhaustion. "Glad to see you all moving. Get out of the canyon safely." Relief washed over the men. Cheers rose from the ground, ragged and hoarse but genuine. Some laughed, some wept, some simply fell to their knees, staring at the night sky in disbelief. For days, they had been trapped, pinned down, fighting against impossible odds. And now, miraculously, they were alive. As helicopters swept in from the extraction point, carrying additional reinforcements and medics, the men of Task Unit Bravo finally allowed themselves to breathe. Stretchers were loaded, weapons secured, and the wounded were tended to with frantic care. Every hand moved quickly, efficiently, the instincts of warriors who had fought for their lives etched into muscle memory. Harris stayed behind for a moment, scanning the canyon one last time. The devastation was total. Smoking ridges, shattered rocks, scorched earth. Yet it was also a testament to courage, skill, and unyielding will. And in the sky above, Mitchell's silhouette faded into the darkness, the warthog limping toward safety, a silent guardian that had fought as fiercely as the men below. Hours later, as the last helicopters lifted off, Harris gathered his men for a head count. Every man was alive. Every man had made it. A collective exhale rose from the canyon, heavy with relief, exhaustion, and a profound sense of gratitude. Around the medics, men who had been shot, burned, or otherwise injured received immediate attention. Some were stable, others critical, but every one of them had survived against impossible odds. They were heroes forged in fire, their endurance and skill tested to the absolute limit. News of the battle would later spread through military channels as a story of unprecedented bravery. Nearly 400 SEALs trapped, fighting against overwhelming numbers, and rescued by the precision and courage of a single A-10 pilot. It would be studied in training rooms, written in reports, and commemorated as an example of combined air-ground warfare at its finest. For the men on the ground, though, it was simpler. They had survived. They had seen their brothers fall and rise, witnessed the hand of fate delivered by a fearless pilot, and learned again what it meant to rely on one another. They were bound now, not just by orders or duty, but by shared trauma and the unbreakable bond of survival. Mitchell herself returned to base, her aircraft badly damaged but intact. She stepped out of the cockpit, body shaking from fatigue, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Engineers rushed to assess the warthog, while she removed her helmet, letting her hair fall loose and her eyes close for a moment. She had flown deeper into hell than any human should, faced death countless times, and emerged alive, but the weight of the mission lingered. Command greeted her with quiet, formal respect. But even in debriefings, the truth was clear. This mission had been as much about courage as skill, about human instinct as mechanical might. Every life saved was a testament to her unwavering commitment. Meanwhile, Harris walked among his men, checking on each squad, offering words of encouragement, gratitude, and solemn acknowledgement of loss. There were wounded, yes, but they were alive. And that alone was a victory beyond calculation. Later, in private, he finally allowed himself a moment to reflect. He thought of the men who had fought and fallen, of the courage displayed in the most desperate of circumstances, and of the A-10 that had turned a near-certain defeat into a triumph of human will. "This is a story we'll carry with us forever," he murmured to no one in particular. Every man, every shot, every pass from that pilot. It saved us all. Across the military community, honors would follow. Medals, commendations, and citations would be awarded for bravery, skill, and extraordinary service. The SEALs would be celebrated, but so too would Captain Sarah Mitchell, the woman in the sky who had danced with death, faced impossible odds, and never wavered. Yet despite the accolades, the personal impact lingered most. For Harris and his men, every sunrise after that night would carry the memory of fear, exhaustion, and relief. Every laugh, every conversation, every quiet moment would be shadowed by what they had endured and what had been required to survive. For Mitchell, too, the experience left a mark. She would never forget the SEALs below, their determination, and the faces of those she had saved. She had pushed herself to the limits of human endurance, her aircraft battered but her spirit unbroken. And in that moment, she understood the weight of responsibility, not just as a pilot, but as a guardian of life itself. Years later, veterans of Task Unit Bravo would recount the story to new recruits. They would tell of mountains that tried to swallow men whole, of relentless enemies, and of a pilot who defied physics, fate, and fear to save hundreds of lives. They would describe the terror, the fire, the explosions, and the bond forged between ground troops and air support. And every retelling would end with the same truth. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let it dictate your actions. The canyon, once a place of death, was now silent, scarred, and empty. But the memory of the battle, the bravery, and the miracle in the sky endured. Captain Sarah Mitchell's Warthog limped back to base, engines burning, systems damaged, yet it carried with it the weight of salvation. The SEALs were safe, alive, and whole. Families would see them again. Brothers would embrace. Lives would continue, thanks to one woman who had refused to let the darkness win. Harris finally allowed himself to smile, ragged and tired. Around him, men laughed, wept, and shared stories of bravery and survival. The nightmare of the canyon had ended. The men were free. And in the sky above, the Warthog rested at last, wings battered, engines cooling, a silent sentinel that had delivered them all home. The mission was complete. The impossible had been achieved. And heroes on the ground and in the sky would forever remember the night they stared into the abyss and refused to fall.